Reports are starting to escalate surrounding the Milwaukee Bucks and trade talks as a brand new report has dropped revealing two new Bucks trade targets. And who these players are may surprise you. So break that down in this episode as well as discuss what it can mean going forward for the Milwaukee Bucks. So stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we get into it, quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. If you're a part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Bucks content. And let's just get right into it. There's a lot to go over today. The Bucks are 8-9 now. They got a couple of big wins. They've been playing really well as of late. Khris Middleton's return is on the horizon. We have an update on his front as well. But a brand new report has just dropped a couple hours ago surrounding a familiar face. I made a video on him a few days ago, as well as someone new. So I'm going to break that down. Let's just dive right into it. So you can see this here from Gary. The Milwaukee Bucks are showing interest in Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Thomas. And if you actually read the report, it's basically saying that they want to get they obviously want to get some scoring help as well as defense. And this is interesting. So if they can get both of these guys, that would obviously be huge. We're going to dive into each one individually here, but we knew that the odds were favoring, and the Bucks were heavy favorites among, the other favorites to land Cam Thomas if he was to be dealt from Brooklyn. And all reports are indicating at this point that the Brooklyn Nets are in a full fire sale, and they're going to be selling everybody, including Cam Thomas. So if they do this, people were wondering, why does he fit into the Bucks? How does this make sense? And I still don't think it's a great move for the Milwaukee Bucks. I actually prefer Dorian Finney-Smith given the amount of money, or given the amount of, money, but also given the amount of assets it would take to acquire Dorian versus Cam. But again, you look at the lineup here, and the team is actually starting to roll a little bit. So they've been playing, Dame, AJ Green, and Gary Trent Jr. specifically. Both AJ and Gary Trent Jr. have been shooting the lights out of the ball. They've come back to earth in the sense of they've come back to where they have been. Specifically, Gary Trent Jr. Obviously, AJ Green hasn't played in the NBA very long, but Gary Trent Jr. has been obviously a phenomenal shooter for the most part of his career, at least a very, slightly above average shooter, a very consistent guy. And now he's finally doing that for the Milwaukee Bucks, and that's led to them now getting back into the Eastern Conference race at, I believe, they're 6th in the East at the time of recording. So it's becoming very interesting. If they can hold on to the middle of the East, and if Gary Trent Jr. can hold on, they can hold on to that 6th spot. Given their start, that's very solid so far. But again, Dorian Finney-Smith is interesting as well, and Cam Thomas, he is a huge liability defensively, but he's also a huge offensive, guy. And as you look into the stats here, it's super intriguing because you can see here, Cam Thomas at this point is averaging 25, 3, and 3. And again, he's kind of the main guy for the this Brooklyn Nets team. So I would take some of these stats with a grain of salt. We've seen it before where, players, they go out, they play phenomenally for a team that doesn't have many offensive weapons, and then they come back down to earth and they play for a competitive team. So he would be good, though. He's shooting solid from 3. Very good from 3, very solid from the field. And he would be a guy who, again, he hasn't been phenomenal defensively. He's 6'4", so he's not super small, but he's also not a huge guy or anything like that. He's an average defender to below average, but he's a very good scorer, can create on the ball. And the question mark will become where he would fit into this team. And I made a video on this a few days ago, so you can go check that out if you want a more in-depth dive on this and a more in-depth look. But ultimately, it would come down to whether or not the Bucks see themselves as needing another scorer. And I think as Khris Middleton nears a return, as Gary Trent Jr. continues to play well, I feel as if Cam Thomas makes less and less sense for this Milwaukee Bucks team, specifically because they really haven't had a scoring problem lately. Brook Lopez is starting to play way better. Gary Trent Jr., way better. Taurean Prince, way better. Everyone's starting to come back now, to their career averages. And if that is going to happen, and Dame and Giannis are starting to develop chemistry like we've been seeing the past few games, like we saw in the Charlotte game where LaMelo dropped 50 and they still lost, the Hornets that is, the Bucks are starting to look good. And ultimately, what it comes down to is how well will the Milwaukee Bucks be without a guy like Cam Thomas or without a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith. And as you look at Dorian Finney-Smith, it's another intriguing option here. And I think it makes a bit more sense, actually, for me than a guy like, of course, Cam Thomas. Because Dorian Finney-Smith, as you can see his stats here, is averaging 10, 5, and 2. But he is a 3-and-D wing. He's 31 years old, approaching 32. And he's a guy who, throughout his entire career, whether it was with the Mavs and now obviously playing his role with the Brooklyn Nets, but he is a strictly 3-and-D player. He's shooting phenomenally this year. He's shooting 41%. He is hitting a lot of his threes. But he's a very, very different player compared to Cam Thomas. Dorian Finney-Smith would slide into the lineup. He'd probably, you could argue for him to start, especially with Khris Middleton not being there. But realistically, he'll probably be a 3-and-D guy off the bench, help add some depth to that bench unit. And he's a very good veteran presence. And as you see his success with the Mavs and the time with Luka Doncic, he's just a guy who will come and he helps you win. He is a winning player. And whether or not you'd be able to get him if you're the Milwaukee Bucks, I would assume the Nets would probably be looking for, I don't think the Bucks would pay a first, but they're so limited in their draft capital that all they have is a 2031 first and a 2031 second round pick. So I don't know if they'd be willing to give up either of those. I mean, a second for sure, but I don't know if they'd be willing to give up first for Dorian Finney-Smith. And maybe you could come up with some package to where they're targeting both Cam Thomas and Dorian Finney-Smith. And if they're looking to do that, then you would assume that maybe they just go for a huge upgrade off the bench. Then you have Dame, Khris Middleton, Torian, Giannis, and Brook Lopez. And then you have a bench of, Cam Thomas, Gary Trent Jr., Dorian Finney-Smith. You probably ship Bobby Portis out in that deal. So then it starts to look good. And I think in any situation, having Dorian Finney-Smith instead of Bobby Portis would be an upgrade for what this team needs. Much better defensively. Can guard, really 1 through 4-ish. 1 through 5 if you're, not one of the big centers. So it's an interesting report. Let me know down below what your thoughts are on it. And it's going to be very interesting. But speaking of some of the returns, we have some Khris Middleton updates. So you can see here, according to Katie George of ESPN, during the Bucks and Bulls game last night, Doc Rivers says he expects Khris Middleton to be available next week. He did hedge the news by saying it's still up to Middleton, but it could be a positive sign in the former All-Star's recovery. And this was, of course, last week. So now this is Monday. So this was a few days ago. And I bring this up because now this should be the week where he is nearing a return. And we are officially on Khris Middleton watch. All signs point to him returning in one of the next 2 games. So at this point, it seems like all signs are pointing to not Dorian Finney-Smith, but Khris Middleton returning this week from his big injury. And hopefully it won't keep him out much longer because this big injury has been a lot worse than we initially thought it was going to be. And at this point of the season, if they can start to get Khris Middleton back, everyone's starting to get healthy again. We saw Ryan Rollins be available in the last game against the Hornets. So everything is looking up for the Milwaukee Bucks. If they continue to stay healthy, I think the sky is the limit for this team. And I've been saying that all along, even throughout their stretches of poor play, they've continued to show some positive signs. And now they're 8-9, they're approaching 500, and I think they're going to be in for a very good season going forward. So let me know what your thoughts are on that regarding the Khris Middleton front. Return seems imminent. Hopefully he can, be solid. He's 34, coming off of multiple injuries, which is why I also think that the Milwaukee Bucks are in the market for maybe another scorer like Cam Thomas, because he's obviously a younger guy. And regarding Khris Middleton, if he comes back and he's not the Middleton or even a bit of the Middleton we expect, things will things could get a little bit rough there. But one quick thing before we wrap up, one quick thing. Damian Lillard revealed the main reason for the massive season turnaround. He spoke out and just revealed some interesting things. This season, they've been playing way better as of late, winning 5 of the last 6. The way we started the season was rough, but we're starting to play the type of basketball we wanted to play coming into the season, and now we're starting to feel good about ourselves. I think on offense and defense, we're starting to do what coaches want us to do, and we're getting the results we want. Our group chat has been extremely active, is trying to encourage each other. I think it's coming together on the court, which is a bit of a funny quote there, but it's ultimately true. Like, you look at Dame and Giannis, and I said it in the last post-game video I did, I think it was against the Bulls. Giannis and Dame are looking like they're finally figuring each other out in the pick and roll. They're figuring each other out how to play alongside. Giannis is figuring out how to play alongside Dame, and Dame is figuring out how to play alongside a superstar in Giannis. And the Bucks are slowly starting to look like contenders again. Giannis is having the best season of his career, averaging the most points. He's had the most 30-point games. And ultimately, I think the Bucks are at a point now where it's like they're starting to look good. Giannis is starting to look really good. And if they can continue to do this with Giannis playing phenomenally, Damian Lillard playing great, and you get Khris Middleton back, and you keep, Giannis Antetokounmpo, who has the most 30-point games in the last decade, keep him rolling, things will be looking very good for this Milwaukee Bucks team. And ultimately going forward, the sky's the limit, like I said, for this team. So I think at the end of the day, the team's going to be good. They're going to be playoff contenders, and I think they're coming, especially if they make a couple of moves like Cam Thomas, or more importantly to me, Dorian Finney-Smith. Things are looking up for this Milwaukee Bucks team. But that'll wrap it up. Thank you guys for watching. See you later.